All right, good to be here, and I agree with what Ray said earlier. Kentucky has a wonderful forage support and grazing support. You're lucky to have them and have the university with such support of grazing. They've always been leaders in the grazing movement and forage movement. So what I've decided to do is kind of wing this. I've got mainly just pictures, and I'm just going to talk about the different things and try to give some insight on the resources and the connection with multi-species, and there will be a tie back to all the different resources. NRCS has an acronym they call SWAPA, and it's soil, water, plant, animal, and air, and then human is a consideration. Then holistic management looks at the energy flow, water cycle, nutrient cycle, and the community dynamics being the way everything works. And a lot of it's focused on the soil, but it could be community as far as people too, and it's interesting. So I think of everything in these manners. This is my wife here, and that's a no-till garden, and she and my stepson manage all the things on the farm. We have some pickup labor too, but in general we do all the different things, and we have just about every enterprise. All the way from a cow share dairy to pigs and chickens and sheep and wool sheep and hair sheep, and it's a little much, I guess, but we like projects. So there's some of the chickens, and something about the chickens is it's become stressful if they get in grass over, say, 6 inches tall. And they're not always in lush grass. Need something vegetative. Of course, they're not ruminants, neither are the pigs, so they need something very vegetative if they're going to get gains on it. You can reduce their feed by as much as 50% by managing that vegetative cover, even though they aren't ruminants. Just another picture of them. Guard dogs are important for the chickens. Not every guard dog is going to work with chickens, so we've learned a little better how to manage the guard dogs and train them and separate some that are usually, if you have the animal die, suspect your dog first. So you think about all that, and one thing that's very important is, I thought I was going to get a dog feeder there, but is the mobile dog feeder that's in the pasture, so they stay in the pasture. This just happens to be an RV we use for interns and other people staying at the farm, and here we graze around it. Now, not stressful for the cattle, but a little stressful for me. We don't let the cattle get around that RV anymore because the wiring got a little disorganized. Sheep we will let get around those areas. And there's Debbie with, she's harvesting a swarm of bees. One thing we've found is if we have an empty hive in that area, a lot of times we'll capture those swarms without having to cut them out. Now, it was stressful for me, so I was sitting in the truck filming her, so she needed that documentation. There's butterflies, another pollinator. That's on a manure pile. They go there for feed, protein, and energy. There they are on some clover. And when I look at clover and grass, I'm looking at carbon and nitrogen, just like protein and energy. And I'm thinking about how am I going to capture that and cycle it back to the ground so that everything gets fed and it keeps cycling. So I want to keep cycling it. Energy, if we don't capture energy, it's just an energy flow. It's actually a loss of heat. And if the ground is hit by sunlight or not covered with mulch or green grass, it's 15 to 20 degrees hotter. And the hotter the temperature, the more variation you'll see between those. We need to know our reference state of our ground, our soils. Web soil survey is a great tool to look at as far as potential, but know what your potential is and you have that target. There's different tools for evaluating pasture, and that one of them is determining indicators of pasture land health. The other one's pasture condition score. And I like to run those and see what my weak link is. In holistic management, they're always talking about the weak link, where's the weak spot. And what I've found on my place is residue is what's usually lacking. It's a little hard to keep the residue, and we'll look a little deeper into that. So evaluating a pasture, we want to look straight down and see what kind of solar panel we have, what kind of coverage we have, those kind of things. And then I like to see 7 to 11 layers of grass. That's the way we're capturing 90% of that sunlight. With clover, it only needs to be like 3 to 5 layers because it's such a bigger canopy. We'll see a picture of that. But I like to slowly part that grass and look deeper into it. This is what I love to see. I want to see the soil tilled up by soil life. They're so active that they're eating all that residue up. Now what this needs is more residue, more fiber. They're eating up my high vegetative fiber and breaking it down a little quick. You see there's a earthworm castings there. They're 5 times more fertile than the surrounding soil. So I'd like, on this particular spot, I could dig, and this was taken about a month ago, but you could dig about 2 inches here. My target is 4 or more inches that you can just dig up the soil and have a handful of soil. So, yeah, let me go next. This was taken at one of the pasture walks. Not this year because we haven't had moisture this year and the earthworms are hibernating this year. But anyway, what we're looking for is pore space. That pore space is where the waters, it's where we live. It's where everything lives, is in the voids. We're living in the void here in this building, not in the walls. Same here with the soil. Those are soil aggregates, and they have carbon coatings on them. If we don't feed the soil enough carbon, then the soil life will eat up those carbon coatings and our soil collapses and it becomes high bulk density. So very compacted and platty, flat layers. We don't want that. So we want lots of roots, we want soil life, and we'll get further into that. But this is a rainfall simulator, and I've run these hundreds, maybe 1,000 times, and they're very predictable. The more cover you have, the less runoff, the more infiltration. What we're not seeing in this picture is what's stored in the soil. Sometimes the soil there won't be any infiltration much. It doesn't equate. So where did the moisture go? It's stored in that, even in that tray. But it's very linear. You can see those front jugs represent runoff, which we don't want. Same as flooding. We have lots of control. We have so much control of flooding and droughts. And yeah, so anyway, the back jugs, you can't see them very well, but they're an inverse of these front jugs. They step down. This one doesn't have much infiltration. You can flip that tray over and sometimes it'll just be dry on the bottom. So, you would think that till it up, let the water in, rough surface. It just doesn't work that way. Something I like to point out to people is going across the farm is a little piece of residue or a rock sitting on top of a pedestal. It's pretty bad whenever it gets to this stage here when you see that pedestal erosion. This used to be one of my weakest fields, and this is paddocked off. You can't see the fence there, but there is a fence running across right up in this area at the top of the hill. It's being a side slope, they don't really like to hang out on that side slope a lot. They won't lay down there. But by doing it, controlling them and keeping them on spots like this, then you can increase the fertility by manure and urine drop. And then feeding hay there, of course, is a great technique to increase that fertility as well. I do soil test about every 3 to 5 years, but I haven't applied fertility other than hay being fed for 15 years now. So here's some sheep running with the cattle. Some people call it a flurd. Sometimes we'll run, I have run everything together. Cattle, sheep, goats, even pigs, even some camelids, alpaca, no, it wasn't alpaca, it was llamas. But anyway, the animal unit equivalent of a sheep is like 5 to 1 1,000-pound cow. Where the real magic comes in is that their manure is pelletized. Their distribution is 5 times greater than cattle. If you lose a calf, you same as lost 5 sheep. You know, with sheep, it'd be a fifth of what that calf value was. You can run about 24% higher stocking rate if you're running sheep and goats with cattle. So that's a hold-on is what Allen Nation used to call it, stacked enterprise. This is where I've just run a high poly wire and some sheep in there going to a mineral feeder. Now I don't worry so much about the high copper. It's kind of common knowledge not to feed high copper to sheep, but some people are feeding extreme levels of copper to sheep and not having issues. And I've been doing it for some time now, 1,900 part per million copper, and it's a cattle mineral. And what I do is rotate out different minerals. They're mixed minerals, but I don't do the free choice enterprise minerals like some grazers do. But anyway, if it was better hay, this is just a way that we can feed something to the sheep and not to the cattle. Had one producer I worked with, and he was running a flurd, and he got rid of the sheep because the cattle wouldn't let the sheep have shade. All he needed to do was do a poly wire like this and designate an area for shade. So we need to keep it simple. Here's some sheep shaded up. This is the first tree. There's about 10 acres above this, and this is the first tree down the hill. Trees are impacted more by compaction than anything else. So one way, if we were concerned about this tree, then we could run a hot wire around there and restrict their use. This is O'Brien's post and some poly wire, and these are wool sheep, I believe, here. Now, I should make another picture, but I run the poly wire. I run 2 wires with sheep, and it controls them if we rotate every couple of days or less. But I run the wires. I've found it, we've tried every combination. I like the 3rd from the top and 3rd from the bottom as far as the spacing for the 2 wires. You know, if they don't have enough grazing, then they're going to break through. So it's important to have some good grass. This is a good stage of grass. It can be too vegetative. You know, we want some fiber in it so it doesn't go through them too lush. This has been rest about right. I kind of like seeing a few brown leaves, but I don't want, see those brown tips, I kind of like that. But I don't want brown shading too much green. I'm losing my solar panel. Here's a mix when we came out of some soybeans that my nephews were running. I like to put annuals in there first, and this was just a mix of sunflowers and Sudan and pearl millet, and you see a giant ragweed here. By the way, ragweed is equal to alfalfa. They don't always like it, cattle don't, but sheep and goats love it. And if you're running a high density, they'll eat anything. I'm running where I'm feed hay in the fall. And I've got hay slides coming up, so I should have waited. But right now I'm running a stock density of 400,000 pounds per acre, but I'm feeding hay. If you run over 70,000 pounds per acre, you're probably going to be rotating more than once a day if you don't have hay out there. But that's training them to eat anything. I mean, they're eating everything. Wing stem, which they normally won't touch. They're even eating some walnut leaves out there, which when they first go in. So briars, you know, cattle are eating everything. Preferred grazing height of I'd say sheep and cattle, is about 6-inch high. That's from Voisin, a researcher from France that put together a lot of grazing studies. But we don't have perfect growing weather, so I like to have it 8 to 10 inches. And for soil health, I want it in the boot stage. We know for making hay that's the best balance of quality and quantity. It's boot stage. Of course, we can't always make it to every field at boot stage, but for soil life, I'm convinced that's the best stage to be at. Some winter stockpiled with wool sheep, and I've noticed the sheep, hair sheep, wool sheep, when we do have snow, and remember, this is south central Kentucky, Scottsville, Kentucky area. In the morning when they get up, they'll start grazing right where they were laying because there's no snow. Pretty cool. Goats, oh my, they are something else. The only reason we have goats is weed control, and I remind myself of that every day, And we have lots of weeds because I have about 180 acres coming out of CRP or CREP. And weeds are super high quality. Browse is incredible quality. It's not much quantity. They can go through, I'm running about 60 or 70 right now, and they're kidding right now. But anyway, an acre or two of ground, they'll go through it. I have to rotate them daily when they're on an acre or two of this browse type stuff. I would bet money they'll eat grass last. Now, unless it's real vegetative. They don't like white clover very well. Red clover they like real well. That's some ailanthus. They'll eat ailanthus, which is the scourge of the woods. There's some buckbrush. It's an intermediate. They don't love buckbrush, but they'll eat it. Honeysuckle and privet are probably the best because they're browse plants that'll carry through winter. They're evergreens. But I've had goats before, and I thought, well, I'm just going to manage that multiflora rose down to a 2-foot base. Kill it, because you're probably not going to keep your goats, So this is just a graveyard where they're grazing some. We just use them for land clearing now. Right now, we're locking them down on some grass because we've found that we need to pin them more and keep them more under control because they're very vulnerable to predators. And goats seem to be more tasty to coyotes than lambs are. Part of the holistic management is we want more coyotes to have more rabbits so the coyotes have something to eat. So you've got more cover for that. One thing that I'm trying out is there's something called a predator trap in wildlife management, and it's where you have a narrow strip of tall grass. And a predator trap, the reason they call it that, if it's too narrow, the coyotes can comb it and catch rabbits. So I've got some areas like that just so the coyotes can catch them. Not lambs, rabbits. All right, so here's some of the goats contained in a guardian dog. There's the dog feeder I was talking about. It's the Greg Judy design, if you want to look at that. But it's just 8-inch welded wire panel off the ground where the dog can go in. The sheep and goats neither have gone in there, and it's held up to cattle rubbing on it, which they love to rub on it. There's some electronet, and it's just like Lewis talked about earlier on the animals catching it. I've lost a few into electronet. They get tangled in it. And the worst thing is to not have it on. You want it on, but it can be dangerous. And it's great for containing them. It's good for predator control. We've got a lot of this. I don't like to use it. If you're going through the woods, try to use polywire. We'll use 3 wires with goats usually, but I've got some goats that are broke real well to electric. There's the kids, like I say, very vulnerable. We don't have any shelter for sheep and goats. but woods. And as long as they have woods or something like that, then, but when they're lambing and kidding now, you need to target that to be in March or April, not in January, February. That can be a disaster. There's a before and after picture that was taken this fall, and they were on that for about 2 days, I believe, maybe 3 days. And there's a tire tank, and it doesn't have a great way to drain it, so I siphon the water out of it every once in a while. That's some fly paper around an old protein tub, and I used to just do it that way. Caught so many birds that I quit doing that. Now I've added this chicken wire on there, and the birds land on the chicken wire, eat the flies, and leave, so it helps both of us. So that works real well. There it is a little closer. Oh, let me go back. I forgot to mention, we put blocks in the deeper tanks so that sheep and goats, if they fall in there, they can escape out. I've tried ramps, that didn't work as well. The worst thing is the low water level where the sheep fall off in there and they can't get back out. That's a shade mobile. It's just an old tobacco scaffold wagon. We've extended the end zone, and it's high enough that it'll clear gates and all. Need to move those. Now we're just running like 20 dairy cows. Right now I think there's only 13 or 14 in that pasture, and really ought to be moved daily, but it's holding up okay with that low density to move it about every 3 days if we have to. Trees are preferred, and I recommend anybody that needs shade, just go ahead and plant some trees. They grow pretty fast. I've got a tree I planted in my yard when my daughter was born. She's 27 now, and it's 27-inch diameter. They grow pretty fast. So these are some tree tubes. Tubex is the best tree tube I've found, and then there's we'll have an offset wire next to that to protect them. Don't let the cattle get near them, but the sheep can go graze around them. That's a walnut silvopasture area, and that was just some trees that we left behind while it was in crep. So those trees are about 12 years old. And the great thing about that is it's dispersed shade, dispersed animals. The quality will be high, the production may be off a little because of energy. There's only so much light getting to the ground. In silvopasture, the biggest problem I've seen dealing with people is they plant too many trees. You want 50% light getting to the ground. When they're mature, you only need like 12 trees per acre. So about 80 feet apart was the target here. Now, you know, you'd vary that, but be average. You got all the different rooting. The UN has silvopasture as one of the best things for climate change. There's a lot of money coming into climate change, so I expect things like this to get a lot more support in the future. That's just a water corral, I call it. Actually, my cattle corral is right here next to it. This touches about 5 or 6 fields, maybe 7 fields when you extend through a different lane. But and we have some gravel dumped there now, Lewis. But yeah, we load out about every 3 weeks usually, and we sell about 60 steers a year, 60 lambs, and about 60 pigs a year, and then now it'll be probably 60 goats. There's a ball water, that's a Ritchie, and you know, the ball waters are wonderful, and I know we all like them, but they need to be drained at least every 3 months. One thing about soil life, when you increase the soil life and the earthworms and all, you know, in a rain, you've seen them on the pavement. Well, you just plunge in that stopper if you had never drained one, and I bet I've had a half gallon of earthworms come out of that tank. And they die in there and they sour. So it can make it smell your water every once in a while and make sure that it's fresh. Had one producer I worked with, and his cattle got sick, and what it was is a possum had fallen in there, and the water, they weren't drinking the water. But they're great waters. Just a little side note there. That's some pig water. It's the weak link in my pig production. I'm going to add some nipple waters on a barrel and do a little better with that. And then I'm going to put a welded wire on top of these open tanks. Pigs love water. If water was a shortage, I'd go to goats because they almost don't drink water. In fact, if it's just going to be, they're going to be in a paddock 1 or 2 days and they've had water in the last, I'm not too concerned about it. Now cattle, you would never do that. You can haul water to goats real easily, mobile water. And another idea on the mobile water, I believe Jeff mentioned or showed where the cattle dynamics, they weren't grazing beyond the 800 feet so much. So I call it supplemental water, is have a supplemental water like a tote tank and just put you some water back there temporary. Just fill up your tank, it's going to draw them back there, and now hopefully they're going to get more grazing out of that area. If you want to change the fertility on your farm, change the watering site because that's where the nutrients are a lot of times. So just don't let them have that same water site, rest it a little longer and make them water somewhere else, and it really can help the production. This is just a break-in pen we do every animal that comes on the place. Usually unless we know that it's broke to electric, we'll put them in a small pen, put an offset electric on around either woven wire or welded wire. And when they start hanging in the middle of the pen and not tearing up the wire anymore, which is about 3 days, we'll move them to their location. Pigs are one of the easiest animals to contain once they train to electric. We run a wire at 4 inches and something like 10 inches. And some of it's just single wire. Nose height of the animal is where we place those wires. That's some perilla mint. That's the most dangerous weed, most poisonous weed in the east. I'm not too concerned about it. They call it chiso if you're organic and you eat at a fancy restaurant. They've had it on my plate at one of those fancy restaurants, and I ate it because I think monogastrics must not be as poisonous. For us, it must not be as poisonous. But anyway, I'm not too concerned about the toxin if they have choice. And what I'm concerned about is the shading. And that's true of all weeds. I'm looking at light. I want desirables to get the most desirable plants to get the most light and then be shading out undesirables. I have total confidence I can control any annual weed. Perennials are another deal. But annual weeds just have cover whenever they germinate. It's that simple. So if you're growing things like perilla mint and wing stem and Japanese stilt grass, you need more light because those can sustain in lower light. So just add more light and you can increase. That's the same general area. That's some annual ryegrass. Put hay in for the pigs, especially when they're pigging. Right now, I just had 13 piglets the other night, and she's back in that hay with her little piglets. They don't eat it so much, but they love to lay in it, and we'll put it in some hutches too. Different feeding methods. I've been doing this for, 6 years now, and I feed hay in the fall. So I start feeding hay whenever we got some moisture, and then I'll feed for about a month in the fall. Feed hay when you can grow grass. So I've been doing that, and my calculations this year was if I could just grow 6 pounds of extra grass per acre on the other land, then it was worth me feeding hay. I've got some great grass on other paddocks that I haven't started yet, and we didn't get a killing frost at home last night, so I'm hoping anytime you get 60 degrees for 3 days, you're going to get a little growth if you have a solar panel of leaf out there. So anyway, this is just some bale grazing there. This is where I unrolled some hay, and Jason and I were talking a little earlier, is need high quality hay if you're going to unroll it in the fall. So normally we do bale grazing in the fall when we're holding them back to grow more grass. Place the mineral feeder is a wonderful thing. Anytime I'm placing a mineral feeder, I'm thinking, what do I need to tromp? And I'll place the mineral right next to whatever I'm wanting to tromp. Here's another weak field where we were unrolling hay. Just did it the old hard-fashioned way. That's a great thing about hills. But the unrolling, yeah, probably a little higher loss. It can be a higher loss, but it can be more efficient if it's done right, if you make them clean it up. Sheep, you'll see sheep come around a roll of hay, and then maybe 5 minutes later, there's no sheep around it, just cattle. That's because they're bottom of the pecking order. So unrolling it, they have a lot more access. The boss cows can't defend that hay ring either. There's some unrolled and just hot wire. The fencing's been talked about, and one thing, if we were just running cattle, we'd use a lot of single strand. So there's an extra cost with multi-species if you go beyond a certain rate. If you just stock, let's just say with goats, it could be one to two goats per cow. And Texas A&M, I believe, did that research and without affecting the grazing of the cow. It might even improve it because they're going to eat the briars and multiflora and stuff like that. But if you go beyond that, now with sheep, it's different. They're almost little cows. You'd never say that about a goat. But the cattle, the sheep, I probably wouldn't want to go not over one per cow, but more like 1 per 2 cows might be a better ratio. Then you could just let them roam. But realize whatever's the first grazer, that means the sheep are going to be getting to all the paddocks. You're going to paddock off your cattle. The cattle are going to be the second grazer and getting a lower quality diet. Whenever I'm running lower on forage, I'll put the sheep on the best forage and separate them from the flurred. That way, because they don't quit grazing. They're going to graze till it's down to the ground. So you've got to be a new grass manager whenever you go to sheep. That's my corral there, and I know it's a little blurry, but let's see, Ron mentioned earlier the Canadian sorting. He called it something a little different. What'd you call it, Ron?
Part of the two-state.
Yeah, two-state. Yeah. Well, here I love this corral. I've built a bunch of corrals on my place and worked with others, and I love this lane going all the way around, and it goes all the way to the tub, and then there's the head gate, and it faces 3 pens. Sorting's very important to us. We only give a couple of shots, blackleg and pink eye vaccine. But anyway, this alley going around here, and here's where it goes into the 2 alleys. So here's the sort. We'd put a board across here. The calves can go under, and the cows come around here. And the man stands here, and you can just do this rocking thing to sort them. That's in theory. In reality, you're going to be more active. But yeah, so it's pretty easy to sort there. And then again, we can sort out here in these 3 pens. If you miss one or you want to resort, you just send them back through. This works wonderful, and it holds a lot of animals. Of course, it's scale-based, but this is something I call the master link, and this is really useful in my rough country because I have a lot of this is like a tree draw, where the drainage is down through here. So I just put a permanent fence across here. It's only 2 strands of hot wire, but it's not hot. Make it hot by tying into this perimeter fence here with a poly wire, and then you tie in another one over here, and we can paddock off without fencing that whole draw. Another benefit of it is we don't have animals going up and down this draw. This is 10 times less fence. It really works well. That Zammer handle, and if you haven't used Zammer temporary handles, they're the one to buy. They have a hot and a cold in them. They work real well. It's just another paddock there. Here we've got, it's just taller vegetation than I normally would like to graze. It's gone beyond the boot stage, but we're tromping down. Our target is tromp down a third, them eat a third, and then a third standing. And that's pretty much what that's doing there. So the summary is be observant and watchful of everything and manage for whatever the weak resource is. As Ray mentioned, we have a pasture walk every year, and it gives us a time to clean up the farm, right? So October 17th this coming year, and it's was 10 to 3, but we find we're running out of time, so 10 to 4, and you can RSVP. And then my website has a number of resources on it too, like a grazing calendar for sheep and goats, and then one for cattle, and there's something on silvopasture. There's a bunch of stuff on there. And with that, take questions if there's time, Ray.
Yeah, question for Greg?
Yeah.
You mentioned unrolling hay, which we do that stuff too. We actually do it in the winter as well. I often thought it'd be nice to unroll for a couple days, but if they're wet, humid weather in the winter, how
When it's raining, I don't unroll. I go to bale grazing. Now, if you just did a limited quantity and they could get to it real quick, you know, a lot of even not using a ring, I know that's questionable because, you know, they're going to waste some. But when you have high numbers and they eat it real fast, then, you know, I didn't cover this, but one ring I really like, and it's not as utilization minded, is that plastic ring. There's enough waste that it doesn't mud out as much, and they can push it around. I really like those. Then I can roll it to the next spot without bringing a tractor out there. Yeah, I don't get hung up on just unrolling. The great thing about the bale grazing is time. Right now we're having to fence a lot of land, and we got the bales out there, and they're already out there, and just need to move a poly wire.
Yeah, we don't have trouble with unrolling in wet weather if cattle consume it in 12 hours.
Right,
But
right.
I was thinking it'd be nice to be able to put it out for a couple of days at a time. But
And Ronnie Holman does that. He feeds 2 days worth of unrolling, and it's worked well for him. I wouldn't want to go longer than 2 days. Yeah, you can waste a lot of hay if you don't watch it. But you, like I say, we can conserve it if it's done right. And it's
dry enough, you roll it out, if it's raining and wet, they'll break.
Yep. There's a tool called spin-off. I don't have one, but I know people with them, and they're wonderful. Spin-off is just it's a spear that'll spin either direction. They're pretty cool. You can get them for the front or the back.
Different soils have different pH, and it says in your notes here, pH level of 6.8 is optimal for promoting soil life, and 6.2 for agronomic purposes. So how do you try, or do you ever need to try manipulating pH at all?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, so I find about every 10 years I have to put on lime. That's because all the cycling going on. You know, normally it's 5 years people talk about, but yeah, I'm trying to keep it at 6.8. There's no harm to agronomic at 6.2. I mean, at 6.8. And somebody else that's more versed in fertility could probably address this better, but I think it's easier to keep at 6.8 than it is at 6.2. You've got buffer.
So just to add to that, because I suggest to most of the farmers I work with, spoil your best fields. Some farmers try and make the poor fields into good ones.
Right.
That's a long-term thing. So I say, don't be frightened of spoiling your best fields. They pay the bills. Any thoughts on that? Because trying to bring the other ones up can be a distraction. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to. So the way I understand the question is, a lot of people focus on the weaker fields instead of the better fields. You know, precision ag focuses on the better fields and just getting more out of the best fields. And I think that's a fair way. You know, I tend to get distracted because I'm a conservationist, and I tend to look at those poor fields and want to improve them. Jim Garish has been mentioned several times. I asked him that same question one time, and he said, well, they're all degraded fields, you know, in pasture. I do think we get rewarded, well, we know that we get rewarded more for fertility on low testing soils of fertility, phosphorus and potash, probably pH as well. So we may get more bang for a buck on those, but if it's the soil type is a low production site, then there's a limit, like that reference state I said. If it can only go so far, then you probably don't need to be worrying too much about it. That brings up like rocky fields, bedrock fields. Hairy vetch and ryegrass are my preferred grasses or plants for those kind of sites because the hairy vetch can cover those rocks, and ryegrass would add to it, and they grow when there's moisture. So I think hairy vetch is underutilized as a forage. The problem with it, it's so palatable that they'll eat it out. I'll see it in a lot of fields, but it's not there in the spring because they grazed it. So we need to hold off of it till spring to really get the reward. If you want to shade plants out, then use things like vetch and peas and ryegrass. But your target is you've got to let it get tall for whenever those weeds are going to germinate.
Greg, have you ever had any photosensitization on hairy vetch?
I probably hadn't grazed enough of it to say, but like sunburn, right? Yep. Buckwheat's supposed to do the same thing. I haven't seen it, but doesn't mean it's not there, you know, possibility of it. And most of my mixes are going to be diverse, so. Jeff? Yeah, ooh, it's still a threat. But I've noticed where it's grazed lower, it's worse. Where the animals shade up, nimblewheel, he's talking about controlling nimblewheel, and it's a scourge. It's a native Muhlenbergii, I believe, and my animals eat it, but it's still not productive enough that I still call it a weed. They'll eat it pretty good now. Again, we got to get something. We got to live with it. It's not. We're not going to get rid of it. There's so much seed out there. There's no way we're going to get rid of it. I've rounded up fields in the past, and it was temporarily gone, but it still comes back because there's so much seed, and it's underneath my good forage. All I've got to do is graze it low at the wrong time, and here comes nimblewheel. So I've got to keep more cover. So my target is to leave 6 inches of cover all the time, not in the winter, but yeah. Mowing fence rows, we used to mow fence lines more, and we got more nimblewheel where we mowed. Some people have tried burning, and they said that didn't help. Any other questions? Yeah.
Strictly amaranth. Do your sheep control that?
They do, but they still avoid those spines on it. Of course, it's super high quality. I mean, it's 30% protein. It's real high. It's like 80 in TDN. It's incredible. Now, all the others, like I use loppers a lot because I don't have much of the spiny amaranth. And I'll just lop it, but I'll leave palmer or red root because they're incredible forages. They're good stuff. But the spiny, that's a bad one. We've controlled it real well with just more cover. Yeah. Yeah, walnuts are almost weeds. You know, so many squirrels and floods, and I'll bring them in. We have a lot of trees to begin with, so I don't want silvopasture in every field, you know, just because we already have shade. My thing's about shade usually. Walnuts are the first to drop their leaves and the last to put on leaves. So They have juglans, you know, they're in the juglin family, so there's a possibility of some toxins there. There's also, you know, that whole thing of don't grow tomatoes underneath walnuts. I'm thinking it might control horse nettle, same family. I may be getting your question mixed up, but we are going to plant some persimmon, and we're going to have a food forest in some other areas. We're looking at exploring the whole gamut of silvopasture. We got chestnuts, yeah.
As far as silvopasture and the wood, though, are you running cattle? Does the wood not get mineralized or lose its wood value?
It's a good question. She's talking about running stock in the woods and the mineralization, mineral stains, and all damage to the woods. Most of it's compaction is the thing, but yeah, poplar can have those mineral stains in it. You know, if it's a quick in and out, then it's not a big deal, and especially if you have shade like those walnuts all across the pasture. If those were even poplar, now poplar are not a great silvopasture tree because they get epicormic branching. They'll branch when they get light. But they're going to be dispersed and not cause those issues as much. The target is saw timber. So we're going to be trimming those walnuts up to 21 feet. That gets you a 20-foot log or taller. So the shade moves away from the trunk whenever you trim them too, so that helps that dispersal of compaction. Yeah. Persimmon's one I'm kind of excited about. They can be a weed. You know, pawpaw, I've seen it take over fields too. So we just have to watch. You know, we mow around milkweed, but it can be a terrible weed too. It's toxic, but the animals eat it. I don't see disorders. So we'll mow those more or graze them harder if we don't want them to stay. So, you know, it's good pollinator habitat. So you just got to manage everything. You know, don't let it get out of control.
Two questions, Greg. What's your targeted grazing time and rest period for your quarter?
Yeah, on the average, it's going to be move them every couple of days or 1 to 3 days. And we have 16 paddocks permanent, maybe 18 now, and then we'll turn that into 45 or more paddocks. So the recovery period is about 45 days on average. But I've got fields rest hopefully at 90 days, 60 days, 20 days. I don't like to get back on a field quicker than 21 days. I don't have the weed control you have. My fields are much more diverse in some problem weeds like wing stem. Cattle don't eat wing stem, or nothing much eats wing stem. It's got some kind of oxalis or something. I forget what the name of it is, but it's got a toxin in it too. They're eating it now, but this 300, 400,000 pound stock density, they're eating it. And I hope that after they're trained with this high stock density, they're going to go back to the field and eat it too. Again, you need diversity and some selectivity. They're on hay now, so they've got selectivity there. But yeah, they're eating everything. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
We're running some layers, chickens or small, chickens and some sheep together, and they seem to get along fine. And I was wondering, for planting seed every year, are there any particular?
Well, the easiest one is annual ryegrass. It's getting a little late now, even though I'm still seeding it, but it should have been seeded earlier. Crabgrass for the summer is the easiest, and these are not very tall plants either usually. And then you know, crimson clover, anything that's vegetative. Yeah, those are the key ones, and then I add a lot of other stuff to them. But yeah.
What all do you add?
Well, it'd be oats. Oats has the most mycorrhizal connections according to the literature, so I like oats in the mix. Yeah, barley, all the different brassicas, but not too much. I don't want over 2 pounds of brassicas per acre. Clover, white clover is wonderful. White clover is higher quality than alfalfa. You know, red clover too, but white clover, you know, is more perennial. Red clover lasts about 3 years. So, yeah, and if you want to really get out there, then you do something that has lots of bugs like broccoli or alfalfa because of the weevil and the thrips and all, and the chickens could eat that. So, what?
I hadn't thought about that. Put things.
Correct. Cotton has more bugs than anything probably, and it's hibiscus. You could plant some of it, but that's really getting crazy.